Thank you very much. As I was saying, thank you very much for showing in such numbers for our first lecture of the second semester, a special lecture as it's dedicated to the memory of Julian Hoxha. I would like to start by welcoming our provost, also our dean, of course, the family of Julian and his friends, dear colleagues, students, ladies and gentlemen. As I said, we're gathered here today to honor the memory of Professor Julian Bennett, who passed away just 1 year ago, and whose absence is still deeply felt within the Department of Archaeology at Bilkent University and far beyond it. Julian was, first and foremost, as you know, a passionate archaeologist, and his intellectual home was the Roman world, especially its frontiers, armies, the material traces of imperial power at the edges of empire. And few colleagues and few scholars, I can say, could speak with such enthusiasm and authority about legionary bases, military logistics, and the lived experience of soldiers stationed far from Rome. Roman and military archaeology were not simply his fields of expertise, they were really his great loves. And it's therefore particularly fitting that his memorial lecture this evening is devoted to Zeugma, one of the most important legionary strongholds along the Euphrates River, a keynote on Rome's eastern frontier. Situated at the major crossing of the river, Zeugma was not only a strategic military site, but also a place of encounter between empires, cultures, languages, and traditions. And it's precisely the kind of site that would have fascinated Julian, a frontier city where military presence, urban life, and cultural hybridity intersect in complex and revealing ways. So it's a great pleasure for me to welcome Professor Kutalmış Görkay to deliver the Julian Bennett Memorial Lecture this evening. Professor Görkay is a classical archaeologist specializing in Greek and Roman archaeology with particular expertise in urbanism, material culture, and frontier societies in Asia Minor. He received his BA, MA, and PhD from Ankara University and pursued further academic training at the University of Oxford and the Westfälische Wilhelms Universität Münster. In addition to his long-standing academic position at Ankara University, Professor Görkay's international academic profile includes appointments as visiting professor and research scholar at the Oxford University. But also he was a former Alexander von Humboldt Fellow, and he has held research fellowships at Harvard University and the CNRS in Bordeaux. In addition, he's also the founding president of the Turkish Institute of Archaeology and Cultural Heritage. Since 2005, Professor Görkay has been working at this site here, Zeugma, one of the most significant long-term archaeological projects on Rome's eastern frontier, one of the ones that will be best known. And his work at Zeugma has fundamentally shaped our understanding of the site, not only the military aspect that Julian was so interested in, but also as a vibrant, multi-layered urban center characterized by cultural interaction and diversity. So today's lecture brings together many of the themes that were close to Julian Bennett's heart. Roman military presence, frontier communities, and the archaeological evidence through which we attempt to reconstruct them. So in doing so, it allows us not only to learn, but also to remember, to reflect on a scholar whose passion for archaeology continues to inspire us as a department. Julian, I'm sure, would have been sitting here on the front row, listening attentively, ready with a question at the end of the presentation. And with that in mind, it's my great honor to invite Professor Kutalmış Görkay to deliver the Julian Bennett Memorial Lecture entitled Reframing a City on the Roman Eastern Frontier, Recent Work at Zeugma. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for the introduction. First of all, I would like to thank the Department of Archaeology at Bilkent University, as well as Peter and Emma, for inviting me to speak at this special event held in memory of the late Professor Julian Bennett. Beyond his many important publications and contributions to the Roman archaeology, I had the privilege of knowing Julian personally. I first met him many years ago through the master's project of one of our students, and our paths later crossed again in Antalya during his associate professorship examination, where I served on the evaluation committee. Whenever we met, we spoke about the legionary base at Zeugma, and I always invited him to visit the site, an invitation that unfortunately was never realized. Today, in his memory, I would like to share new information on the legionary base at Zeugma, an area of particular interest to him. Situated in southeastern Turkey, Zeugma, literally bridge or crossing in ancient Greek, owes this name to the fact that it was located at the major ancient crossings on the river Euphrates. It was thus at the physical intersection of the major east-west trade route and the north-south route along the river. Zeugma actually refers to twin cities on opposing banks of the river. They were Hellenistic settlements established by the commander Seleucus Nicator in around 300 BCE. The settlement on the west bank was called Seleucia after him, and that on the east bank was called Apamea after his Persian and Bactrian wife Apama. After the annexation of the city into the kingdom of Commagene by the General Pompey in 64 BCE, Zeugma became one of the 4 important cities of the kingdom. Zeugma became the major eastern frontier city of the Roman Empire, and with 2 Roman legions, namely Legion X Fritensis and Legion IV Scutica, based in Zeugma in the 1st century CE, the strategic importance and the cosmopolitan nature of the city increased greatly. Due to his geopolitically significant location, the site was an important research ground for those of us who are interested in the hybridized local cultures that were formed by an influx of Greco-Macedonians and Romans to the region. Apart from a Semitic population, the inhabitants of the city included Greco-Macedonians, migrants brought to the city by Seleucus, merchants from the various regions, high-ranking Roman soldiers, whose numbers increased when the city was annexed into the Roman Empire, and also Roman citizens, legionaries, and civil servants. As a consequence, Zeugma is home to archaeological remains that reflect the complicated, sometimes ambiguous, yet extremely varied characters of the ethnicities which mingled within the city and formed new synthesis. The site prospered and functioned as a major Roman city as well as a military base in the 2nd and the 3rd centuries until its sack by the Sasanian king Shapur in 252 and 53 CE. The Zeugma archaeological project is a long-term project that I have been directing since 2005 from Ankara University. Although earlier several teams had worked on the site, it was in 2000 that the extensive salvage excavations were initiated because a newly constructed dam would flood part of the site with the waters of the Euphrates. With the construction of the dam, the whole of Apamea and the 30% of Seleucia were to be flooded. Several Roman residential complexes and a part of the Hellenistic agora were excavated at that time, and the finds were relocated to the Gaziantep Museum. When I took over as the director of Zeugma excavations 5 years later in 2005, the dam had been built, the waters had risen to the maximum level, and the scholars who had worked in the salvage excavations previously had begun to publish some of the finds. But a detailed city plan was still missing, so that's what we set out to do first. Today my talk will focus on 3 key areas of our research program. First, the city's physical expansion and the urban character of the military installation. Second, the diachronic transformation of the main sanctuary at Belkıstepe. And the third, the Roman houses and the city's necropolis. The walls of Apamea on the eastern bank, which were flooded in 2000, had been surveyed with geophysical prospection by a French team of University of Nantes, and the results revealed that the street system and the city circuit of Apamea to be datable to the 3rd century BCE. Several soundings carried out here also revealed polygonal city walls and northeast circular tower of the defense system. By contrast, the Hellenistic city walls of Seleucia have yet to be comprehensively surveyed or investigated. Nonetheless, earlier teams working at Zeugma during the Seleucid excavations proposed provisional reconstructions of the city's extent. Here you see earlier proposal in which the city limits of Seleucia were restricted to the area north of Belkıstepe, the highest point of the city. This is Belkıstepe, and these are the boundaries of the city. Oops, sorry, something happened. Yep. In 2009, we developed a collaborative project with Professor Friederike Fless and Dr. Silke Müth of Berlin University and the Berlin Topoyo Institute in order to test the possible route for the city walls with geophysical methods from 2009. These are the areas that we carried out these geophysical prospections. On the northwestern slope of Belkıstepe, the geophysical prospection gave some anomalies in shape that are similar to the curtain walls and the towers of the defense system in Apamea, although this remains to be corroborated with the test trenches. Geophysical prospection carried out on the eastern and southeastern and south slopes of Belkıstepe, which overlap with the location suggested by our pottery surveys, has given anomalies from a wall. Trenches dug to test these anomalies exposed part of the Roman city wall with stone ashlar with rectangular block and rubble infill. Here you see the details from the plan of the city walls. In the meantime, our surveys carried out to the west of At Meydanı, the flat area to the west and northwest of Belkıstepe, also revealed the remains of walls. Another piece of evidence related to the city's fortifications wall is found to the south of the At Meydanı. An illicit excavation that took place in 2019 on the ridge in close proximity to these anomalies unearthed an architectural remain which may belong to a gate of the city. A building block featuring a carved tabula ansata was unearthed to the north of this location in 2021, providing important information about a gate structure. Similar tabula ansata carved on building blocks have been found at the gate of Palmyra in Droiropos in Syria. Oops. In 2020, magnetic geophysical survey were carried out along the southern boundary at the At Meydanı in order to obtain an overall geophysical picture of the military installation in this area. Here. This is the investigated area indicated by the red circle in this image, here. Covers the flat ground adjacent to the so-called city gate. City gate is here. The results suggest that this zone was also densely built up with the architectural structures consistent with the broader urban fabric of At Meydanı. However, the anomalies visible here point to a gradual and irregular pattern of urban development. Here. Furthermore, evaluation of the data obtained from the geophysical survey on the terraces overlooking Bahçedere suggests that this relatively large terrace was also urbanized with architectural structures, one of which is of great importance to us. This is a nearly elliptical circular structure, probably an amphitheater or training arena, whose parallel we see in the military quarter in Dura Europos. Its diameter is circa 40 meters, which corresponds with the size of Dura training arena. Given the fact that the military amphitheater in Dura was built by a vexillatio from Legio Quadra Suquitica around 216 CE, it is most likely that the Zeugma amphitheatron was taken as a model for the amphitheatron in Dura Europos. Contrary to the previous assumptions, the results of our recent research indicate that the relatively large flat area to the west of Belkıstepe was surrounded by Roman city walls, enclosing the so-called At Meydanı and most of the terraces overlooking Bahçedere. Overall, the archaeological and geophysical data collected during our surveys indicate that the fortified western expansion of the city functioned as a military installation that developed within an urban fabric. Artifacts recovered during test excavations and surveys conducted in this extensive area since 2005 have provided important data for understanding the characteristics of this settlement. All epigraphic material from this area, including honorific and building inscriptions, is in Latin and carved on marble slabs. In addition, stamped roof tiles mainly belong to Legio Quadra Suquitica, as well as the numerous vexillationes and auxilia from other legions found across this extensive area, strongly suggest that this sector of the city functioned as a military colony. Moreover, the presence of ceramics and other small artifacts, including military equipment imported from the western provinces, further supports this interpretation. One particularly important find is a stray Mithras stele depicting a Tauroctony bull slaying scene, which indicates the presence of a militrium in the military quarter with a close parallel at Dura Europos. This is the stele that we found in the military quarter in Zeugma, and this is the one in Mitrium in Dura Europos. To sum up, this installation model finds a close parallel at Dura Europos, where the military quarter was largely constructed by soldiers of Legio Quadra Suquitica after 165 CE. It seems likely that the members of the Scutica legions were actively involved in the design and development of their new military quarter at Dura Europos, as they were at Zeugma. In both cases, this process appears to have facilitated a greater integration of military space into the civic life of the city. Comparable examples of military installations deliberately integrated in the existing Hellenistic urban fabric can be observed at Bostra and Colonia Aelia Capitolina, which is today Jerusalem. The presence of military personnel was not restricted only to the military colony alone. They were also billeted in the civic quarters of the city, mainly in private houses, as demonstrated by finds from domestic contexts. Shown here are items of military equipments unearthed in houses, as well as pictorial and textual graffiti in Latin. Necropolis also served as their final resting places, where the identities of legionaries and veterans, many of whom became integrated into elite local families through marriage, are clearly attested. Shown here are two portrait reliefs, one of the deceased veteran Valles, here, and the other of Teleganos, a librarius who died prematurely. One of the most important cult places in the city is situated on top of the Belkıstepe. Oops, sorry. Though we cannot yet suggest a date for the earliest levels of Belkıstepe, a stray find of a Neo-Hittite hieroglyph demonstrates that the mount was occupied in the 10th and the 9th centuries BCE. In addition, a Semitic inscription written on a basalt block, which you see here, may point to a religious function of this prominent hill in the early Iron Age. At the east of nearly flat Acropolis plateau of Belkıstepe, there is a temple. The temple must have been one of the most monumental structures in the city, depicted on Roman coins from the 2nd and the 3rd century CE as a prostylos-type temple. It has variously been identified as being dedicated to Tyche or Zeus Katabates, based on the cult statue found at the temple and numismatic evidence from the Roman period. The cult statue, found broken in two pieces on Belkıstepe, has been previously identified as Tyche, who was thus proposed as the sole chief goddess of the city. The seated and enthroned female figure wears a purely Greek-style costume. Although severely abraded and worn, elaborately implemented drapery folds of the figure are characteristic of Hellenistic workmanship. Though the figure has been identified as Tyche previously, there was in fact no concrete evidence to identify the statue as a particular goddess. Our work included a small trench at the front of the preserved right side of the throne, brought to light a relief of a winged lion. Zeugma winged lion is probably a religious escorting creature that may define the identity of the goddess it accompanies as the mother of gods, and Astarte, Anahita, or Artemis, or Atargatis. The visual iconography of Zeugma goddess, which displays distinct local characteristics, suggests that the city's cult may have developed within a regional tradition centered on Hierapolis Bambyke in Syria. Let me show you some other parallels from the Gaziantep region and Hierapolis Bambyke. This is a limestone statue of a seated city goddess in Gaziantep Museum. Here you see it there. Frequently called the Syrian goddess. Here's another dedicatory limestone statue from Dolike, the major cult place of Jupiter Dolikenus in Gaziantep. Shown below is a bronze tetradrachm of Hierapolis minted during the reign of Caracalla, depicting the goddess accompanied by two lions alongside and her consort Hadat. The altar on the right is from Apamea and bears a dedicatory inscription to the Mother of Gods, whom Jan Baptist Jon, who worked in Zeugma during the salvage excavation, worked on the inscriptions, associated it with Atargatis. Most important Our excavation at the temple revealed a part of another seated and enthroned cult statue in the same size as the goddess previously identified as Tyche. The figure wears a himation and a chiton underneath. The piece preserved includes the seated male figure's draped hip and parts of his buttocks. The upper body is broken off from the waist, and the legs of the figure appears to have been carved from separate pieces that are now lost. This is the drawing of this, cult statue carved in piecing technique. Well, these two seated cult statues probably date from the same time, but the date was not certain. However, our initial evaluation points to a Hellenistic period. Considering the city's Semitic past, the seated male figure should be enthroned Zeus, or perhaps Zeus Oromastes, the sky god, who was equally acceptable to both Greeks and Persians. The seated goddess that was generally identified as Tyche could then be Hera Teleia, Hera of marriage, who was mentioned as Parastatin, as standing next to Zeus Oromastes in the Antiochos Nomos inscription from Arsamea on the Nymphaios and Samosata, the capital city of the Roman city of the Commagenian kingdom. Several other inscriptions also attested presence of the cult of Zeus as well as Kronos in the city. Here you see these epigraphic evidence. On the other hand, numismatic evidence, although still disputed by scholars, suggests a cult of Zeus as the gods depicted as enthroned in a temple on city coins. However, these statues are not necessarily the sole cult images on Belkıs Tepe. I will return this in due course. Our research has shown that this colossal cult statue of Athena, whose cultic presence is attested by at least two inscriptions, was also set up within the sanctuary. There it was placed within the context of at least two other colossal statues which we have seen. The careful piecing and the choice of local material rather than marble also suggest a date in the Hellenistic period for the Athena statue. However, these three statues are not sole cult images on Belkıs Tepe. A torso of a cuirassed male statue and a piece of a draped female statue found as fallen from the Acropolis raise more questions about the character of the sanctuary. The torso represents a male statue in equestrian cuirass with a cingulum. He wears an oriental sleeve preserved on the figure's right arm. On the back, two stripes, most probably belonging to a Hellenistic royal diadem, are preserved. This torso may represent a Hellenistic ruler, probably from a statue of a king wearing a simplified version of a Hellenistic royal costume. The drape piece, on the other hand, preserves the lower part of the feet of the standing woman wearing a chiton covered by himation. The overall stylistic and the technical assessment of both statues point to a Hellenistic date. The cuirass torso and the draped fragment of the standing woman are of the same size, which may suggest that they were set up at the same time and within the same context. Moreover, the similarity in carving style and dimensions to those of the Athena statues mentioned before suggests that the Athena statue may also have been erected in the sanctuary alongside the cuirass statue and the standing female statue, possibly as a part of a statuary program initiated after an important historical event. To sum up, it was not yet possible to draw firm conclusions regarding the overall statuary program of the sanctuary on Belkıs Tepe. Nevertheless, two seated cult statues, Zeus and his consort, probably the mother of gods, or Hera Teleia, as discussed before, may be understood as Greek reinterpretation of the indigenous sky god and fertile earth goddess of early Iron Age Zeugma. Their installation during the Hellenistic period may have symbolized a divine marriage embodying concepts of power and fertility, and may have alluded allegorically to the marriage of Seleucus Nicator and Apama, through which the twin cities were founded, thereby referencing to the amalgamation of Greek and Semitic populations. As for the cuirass statue and the draped female statue, it is tempting to suggest that they may represent Seleucus Nicator himself and his wife Apama, whose images could have been deliberately placed alongside the two deities. The remarkable statue program at Belkıstepe may have been undertaken by Antiochus I Theos, king of Commagene, following the annexation of the city into the into the kingdom in 64 CE, with the aim of introducing Hellenistic royal cult imagery and creating an ancestral gallery that emphasized his dynastic and genealogical association with Seleucus Nicator, the founder of the Seleucia. Let us turn from the religious public sphere to the domestic private sphere. Most of the city is comprised of residential areas. Homes were the domain of private life, wherein the cultural, official, ethnic, and the social identities of their owners became evident. Architectural decoration in particular has the potential to reflect the taste, lifestyle, and the intellectual worlds of the owners, while smaller finds offer clues about day-to-day uses of spaces. Roman residences in Zeugma, well known for their mosaics, must have belonged to owners of varying social status, including tradesmen, Roman governors, and veterans. In general, the houses display a combination of features drawn from both Greek and Roman residential architecture. Roman elements began to be introduced into Hellenistic houses from the 1st century CE onwards, while houses constructed during the Roman period likewise incorporated Greek features. Most of the lavish houses at Zeugma were inhabited between the 1st and 3rd century CE, during which time the various modifications were made. Following the partial flooding of Zeugma in 2000 due to the Bridge Dam, Apamea was completely flooded, and large-scale rescue excavations carried out on the western bank revealed several luxurious Roman houses. Among the most notable are the House of Poseidon and the House of Euphrates, wealthy mansions that once housed large multi-generational elite families. These complexes often included sub-living units, semi-independent residential suites occupied by descendants of the Curioi or pater familia, along with their own spouses and children. Here you see the sub-living units. These are, separate living units shown in different colors. The House of Poseidon is an especially clear example, originally constructed as two semi-detached homes, Unit A and Unit B. The buildings were later interconnected with a doorway, forming a single mansion suitable for extended family. Yet in the late 2nd or early 3rd century CE, the two units were again separated, likely due to inheritance disputes, and functioned once more as two distinct households. A close examination of the architectural plans confirms the presence of independent but interconnected domestic suites. These self-contained modules were all linked through the principal courtyard, which served as the core, circulatory, and unifying element of the house. In the house of Poseidon, almost all subsidiary living units contain at least one figured mosaic, whereas the main reception halls, the triclinia, typically feature scenes from theatrical plays. The smaller private rooms tend instead to display Dionysiac imagery and love-related scenes. Alongside the architectural evidence, the repetition of similar subjects cycles across separate subsidiary units strongly suggest that these suites house sub-families whose personal identities and preferences were encoded in the mosaic themes. The houses typically consist of a central peristyle courtyard, which were surrounded by rooms, making them a hybrid of Greek and Roman house plans modified in accordance with the local climate. Almost all the houses in Zeugma faced north. Clearly, more consideration was given to the protection from the summer heat than the cold of winter. A result of the increasing need for water due to the rising population at the beginning of the 2nd century on, the open courtyards of the houses began to be covered with mosaic pavements. These not only served as a decorative enhancement of the space, but also enabled the collection of rainwaters in the cistern located around the edges of the courtyard. These open courtyards were sometimes used as shallow pools that cooled the house during the hot summer days. Around the second half of the 2nd century CE, elaborately designed fountains with small basins were added to the courtyard, with many, which may have served to regulate or limit water consumption. Various factors may have influenced the selection of specific scenes. As for the shallow pool, known as impluvia in open courtyards, in the peristyles, scenes related with water were generally chosen. In general, on these mosaics, Poseidon, Okeanos, and Thetis were depicted as surrounded by numerous sea creatures, probably to emphasize the allegoric link between water and abundance and fruitfulness. While certain narrative scenes seems to have alluded to the intellectual milieu to which the homeowners belonged, function often appears to have been the primary criterion in choosing imagery for the particular spaces. For example, reception rooms where homeowners entertained their guests with wine, food, and theatrical performances were decorated in accordance with Dionysiac tradition of conviviality and with scenes drawn from the works of famous playwrights. In the house of Poseidon's reception room, a remarkable mosaic depicts the myth of Pasiphae drawn from Euripides' lost theatrical play Cretans. The Pasiphae story warns against violations of sacred law and uncontrolled desire. Displayed at the triclinium threshold, it served as a moral reminder for guests. It is also plausible that the pantomime version of the story of Pasiphae was the first performance during the room's dedicatory celebration. Another triclinium mosaic in the house of Quintus Calpurnius Aeticus combines two emblemata, Achilles on Skyros and the dramatic moment in which Theonoe falls in love with her cross-dressed sister Leucippe, whose story we know from Latin poet Hyginus. Recent research indicates that this latter scene represents a pantomime performance rather than a purely mythological narrative. Both mosaics engage themes of cross-dressing and transformation, subjects well attested in pantomime traditions. It was suggested that the patron may have been commemorating a memorable performance, perhaps staged in the theater of Zeugma itself. However, I believe that these two related stories were also performed as a pantomime during the commemorative opening ceremony of the newly decorated triclinium, intended to be remembered thereafter. However, in some cases, these selections of scenes may also reflect more subtle private preferences, which I will discuss in due course. My recent research on several mosaic payments at Zeugma has revealed that choice of specific scenes and iconography in some reception rooms may be associated with wedding preparations carried out in the same spaces. One of the most striking among these is a payment bearing a Greek inscription, which was uncovered during the salvage excavations. As I have argued elsewhere, this inscription offers crucial insight into the intention behind the mosaic's placement and its meaning for the viewers. The mosaic payment decorates the floor of a large rectangular chamber, which appears to be one of the public rooms of the house. The mosaic has two large geometric patterns with an inscription in the middle. The inscription has 5 lines and it's rather well preserved. The text is an epithalamium, a wedding song previously unknown. The poem itself was written in dactylic hexameter. Since there is no indication that the inscription part was added later, we can suggest that the whole mosaic payment was laid right before the wedding ceremony as a gift to the couple mentioned in the inscription. Greek rhetorician and the commentator Menander of Laodike describes the preparations of the bridal chamber before wedding. He says, "The alcoves are prepared such as no one had before. The chamber is adorned with flowers and painting of all kinds. It is full of the charms of love." This room was most probably a reception room of the house, but refurbished as a bridal chamber for this particular wedding for Aristeas and Artemidora, mentioned in the poem. Although one should not generalize based solely on this example, it is possible that some of the mosaics depicting scenes of romantic couples, such as the Ariadne and Dionysus, Metiochus and Parthenope, which you see here, Eros and Telete, in the private and reception rooms, might have been laid before such events by relatives or acquaintances as a present to the newlyweds. The house owners then shared these memorable moments proudly with their guests, as these mosaics are found in the public reception rooms of the houses. In the house of Dionysus, the vestibule, besides the peristyle, contains a mosaic of the marriage of Dionysus and Ariadne, an iconic theme representing divine marriage on a wedding couch. The composition includes musicians, Eros, Silenos, Maron, gift-bearing servants, Hymenaios, the personification of wedding hymn. The scene corresponds to the epaulia stage of the wedding, when gifts are brought after the unveiling on the calypteria. Positioned at the entrance of the rock-cut nuptial chamber, later adapted as a reception room, the mosaic established an intentional allegorical association between the divine union and the newly married couple of the household, whose marriage had been arranged by the relatives or acquaintances. The mosaics therefore function both as a blessing for the newlyweds and as a lifelong commemorative eternal image to be remembered. Here I propose that mosaic itself was a wedding gift for the couples who lived in this house. It's even possible that relatives commissioned this costly work as a lavish nuptial present. In later years, It may also have functioned as a welcoming scene for the guests received by the couple. The House of Muses, the excavation of which was completed in recent years, was named after the discovery of a mosaic payment in one of its rooms that depicts the 9 muses of Greek mythology. The house is located in the eastern residential sector of the city. The house is accessed from a main door to the north and extends toward the south and has 4 spaces that are paved with figural mosaics. The room containing the Muses mosaic is located immediately to the right of the main entrance and was a reception room, functioned as an andron. The wall decorations of the square room feature depictions of vine branches and grapes associated with Dionysus and the culture of the convivium, as well as depictions of trissoi and garlands associated with Dionysian rituals. The Muses mosaic features busts of 9 muses depicted inside medallions formed with guilloche motifs. They each have her names inscribed in Greek next to them. The muses were arranged radially in a circular format with a very similar template to that of the mosaics of 7 sages in Baalbek and the Muses mosaic in Akaki in Cyprus. Further south along the corridor, the room to the west probably functioned as a gynekeion. It was decorated with elaborate mosaic decorating 2 identical depictions of a pair of ideal women, each positioned facing towards one of the 2 clini. The women wear different diadems of gold and silver. Since they do not bear any inscription next to them, it's not clear if these ideal figures are personifications of virtues or famous heroines from Greek mythology, which would be suitable for this elaborate women's quarter. The main courtyard is located in the middle of the southern part of the house, and on its east and west sides, it's flanked by 2 loggia-like symmetrically designed porches with 2 Corinthian columns each. Featuring plastered corner plasters and elaborate architectural moldings and decorations, this central courtyard can be dated to the late Hadrianic or early Antonine period based on general proportions, formulation of the acanthus leaves, as well as the form of the islets and the helix of the Corinthian capitals. The plasters in the western porch have limestone Attic Ionic bases as in the Corinthian columns in the courtyard. However, contrary to the fluted limestone drums of the columns in the courtyard, the flutes of the wall plasters in the porch were made by paint on fresco. These details indicated that the stone architecture of the courtyard has been appropriately imitated in the fresco decorations in the same decoration program, probably due to its high cost. The southern side of the central courtyard is decorated with a fountain. It comprises a central niche with a deep rectangular basin on each side. Here you see in the middle. The fountain is painted so as to create the impression of a 2-storied facade with columns and a colorful marble veneer. The richly decorated courtyard of the House of the Muses features a mosaic depicting Okeanos and Thetis, accompanied by various sea creatures and fish, and 2 erotes riding dolphins while fishing. The borders of the courtyard mosaic are surrounded by geometric designs in the form of horizontal lozenges and square frames which contain squares and circular patterns. The walls of the western porch are decorated with a painted imitation of opus sectile consisting of square panels. At the top, the decoration represents veined marble cladding in front of the horizontal lozenges, which were most probably designed to match the border pattern of the courtyard mosaic. The western porch also features an impressive mosaic with two unidentified female figures, again probably depicting idealized women. Unlike some of the wall decorations of Zeugma houses, which have generally two fresco layers, the wall painting of the courtyard of the House of Muses has only one layer of fresco, which is contemporary with the adjacent mosaic pavement. The mosaics and frescoes are related stylistically and probably were made at the same time. In fact, the two surfaces meet neatly and join precisely. Representation of the female figures in bust form in all three mosaics in different spaces of this house, as well as their stylistic similarities, including the manner of rendering highlights and the shadows on the faces, strongly suggest that the entire mosaic program in this building was completed by the same workshop. To sum up, the architectural arrangement and the ornamental aspects of House of Muses, including both the mosaics and the mural paintings, indicate that they belong to a single artistic project dated to the Hadrianic or Antonine period. As a result of these findings, we can propose that mosaics in some of the other Roman houses at Zeugma can also be assigned to Hadrianic or Antonine period, rather than to a later time, as was previously proposed many specialists. Mosaics probably associated the house owners with the intellectual and mythological themes that they could directly and creatively chose in order to project a certain image to their guests. Yet it was with their graves that their claim of cultural identity had to be fit into existing templates portraying their specific cultural and ethnic identities and indicating their social status. In the necropolis of Zeugma, a variety of burial customs can be observed between the late 3rd century BCE and the 3rd century CE. These range from Hellenistic rock-cut cist graves of the earliest Greco-Macedonian settlers to late Hellenistic and early imperial tumuli, locally type rock-cut graves from the late Hellenistic and early imperial period, and rock-cut arcosolium grave chambers from the imperial periods. An accumulation of various burial types coexisted, corresponding to the demands of the cosmopolitan population of this frontier city at the crossroads. Grave owners of the Roman period were depicted in portrait reliefs on rock-cut tomb chambers. The carved identities and the self-representations are various. They continued the iconographic conventions of East Greek and North Syrian sculpture, as well as Roman funerary portrait sculpture from the Western Roman world. Many grave chambers were designed as a triclinium, emulating the reception room of the house in which the deceased members of the family had lived their most joyful moments with acquaintances. Family graves were regarded as the eternal house and also served as memorials. By visiting these sculpturally decorated monuments during the funerary banquets and on special commemorative days, descendants refreshed their sense of ancestral identity and became familiar with the reputable family members who were the pride of the family. One of the best examples of this phenomenon is the family tomb of Aristeas, discovered in 2020 as a result of illicit excavation activities. A subsequent rescue excavation conducted at the site yielded highly significant results. The rock-cut burial chamber, accessed through a rectangular vestibule originally covered by a wooden superstructure and roof tiles, was designed with the arcosolium burial niches. In the rock-cut grave chambers, the remains of at least 75 individuals were identified. The vestibule of the tomb was supplemented with in situ portrait reliefs and stelae and commemorating prominent members of the family. Adjacent to the stelae, which were set on platforms, life-size and slightly smaller portrait statues of important female family members were placed in niches. Yes. Immediately to the right of the entrance to the rock-cut tomb are the portrait leaves of Aristeos, probably the Kyrios, the founder of the family and commissioner of the tomb, and his wife. The vestibule was designed as a gathering space where the relatives and acquaintances could remember and commemorate the deceased during the funerary banquets. An adjacent rock-cut chamber appears to have functioned as a service room or storage area where banqueting equipment and other materials used for these gatherings were kept. The tomb itself, particularly the inscribed reliefs of permanent family members, offers a unique and comprehensive picture of the diverse structure of an elite family at Zeugma. It includes individuals bearing Greek and Latin and Semitic names and reflects hierarchical distinctions in female headdress and costumes. These variations can be traced from the Trajanic period through the late Antonine period, the chronological span to which almost all of the portrait reliefs and statues can be dated. In the meantime, conservation and site management are crucial issues that I have been dealing with over the years. This is the shelter structure for the house of Dionysos and Danae, which was opened to the public in 2010, along with the new Zeugma Mosaic Museum in Gaziantep. We have also developed new 3D digital applications to enhance visitors' perceptions of the Zeugma houses. It was quite difficult when the visitors came into this shelter structure to understand the whole, complex under this shelter. Therefore, we had to, prepare such, 3D applications in order to, give an idea to the visitors how these houses were really looking like in the ancient period. I have also included some images of the new shelter structures for the House of Muses for those who have not seen it yet. It's not open to the public, but I will show you here some of the images, some images from this house. Yeah, this is the shelter structure, and this is the finished, we finished with the restoration and the shelter. It will be open to the public, I think, after a lancement, which will be supposedly organized by the ministry soon. Not so soon, maybe, but in spring, maybe. Yeah, these are the mosaics which you would see underneath the shelter. The visitors will be able to visit the sites tonight as well, which we really don't like, actually, but that's what the ministry likes. Yeah. I mean, it's sometimes difficult to, control the visitors at that, site in the night time. Yeah. Yeah, I would like to, of course, end my talk by expressing my sincere thanks to the Minister of Culture and Tourism and to the relevant institutions and the organization, but most importantly, to my team. Thank you so much.